Hello, everyone. This is a lecture on the needs assessment and needs assessment outline that are coming up. And just to go over the information, we'll do it in class as well. But let's get started at looking at these. So a needs assessment is the first paper that you write, and its purpose is extremely important. Its purpose is to provide background information on the problem, the population, and to provide data to support what you're saying. So if we say asthma is a leading cause of missed days of school and work, then we would have to give data to support it. It's like a report or a review of the literature. And what you will be doing is it's going to support the need for a program, a grant, or an evaluation, whatever it is you're working on. So you're developing a program from a grant. So whatever you write has to support the need for what you want to do for the grant. And the grant is very clear because it gives you goals. So the first thing you would do in a needs assessment is you define the problem using national data. You have to use reliable and peer-reviewed sources. A peer-reviewed source means that the article that you're using has been reviewed by peers for accuracy. When you do that, it makes it a more appropriate and acceptable source. If you're using online sources like web pages, things that end in edu, gov, or org are typically more reliable than sources that end in .com or other endings. What you're using is called secondary data. And the secondary data, it's secondary because someone else collected it and you're using it. So you're looking for secondary data at the national level about your problem, your population, or anything related to that. Whatever you use should support your grant's goals. So you define the problem, you'll tell what is the disease, condition, illness, what does program, if you find this, you might find program that exists, or you might find information that shows there's clear need. You might find information about your population by age, race, geography, ethnicity, or etc. There's lots of ways to categorize people. And you have to look at which risk factors does your population have and which ones will you address. And we started working on this from the logic model, just to go back a little bit. So you're going to use reliable peer-reviewed sources and then secondary data that are from our class webpage or from other sources. The YRBSS is a Youth Risk Behavior Survey, and that and other surveys, depending on your grant, could help you find data. The Centers for Disease Control, the National Institutes of Health. If there are agencies identified in your grant, then you can use those agencies as a good source. There's something called Morbidity and Mortality Weekly, which is MMRW, Morbidity and Mortality Review Weekly. And so what that is it talks about deaths and illness in the United States and gives very clear data. You might find articles on programming. Another one that's I don't have up here that usually people use is the U.S. Census Bureau. They have a lot of data as well. Oops, excuse me. So let's talk about online 2.2, which is your needs assessment outline. This is copied from the document that you're going to use for the assignment, and I just want to go over each item that's here. So as you can see, in red lettering, underlined, you're supposed to list your sources, your reference list. And it says right above that, below this statement, above Roman numeral 1, list your references. So what you'll do in APA format, full format, you will list the references that you have found to date. I do look these up, I do read them. Especially if you start reporting things that I don't think are accurate, I look at your source. But I typically read at least half of the sources that you use. So once you list your sources, and I can't imagine you having more than 10, most people have around 5 at this point in the semester, you will list the problem and the possible generalized population. So asthma in urban or rural youth, drug abuse in rural communities. Let's see, teenage pregnancy in urban areas. So, or vaccine hesitancy in minority populations. So what's the problem and what's the generalized population? That piece of information comes from your grant. And so that's something that should be easy for you to figure out. So the next thing it tells you to do is to list one risk factor. So you have risk factors from your logic model. They were potential causes for the problem that you're working on. So the risk factor, you will list the risk factor, and then you'll list a source that using in-text citation from APA. So you'll have in-text citation is typically last name, year, and then you'll tell what is going to help you with this risk factor. So if this risk factor were age, it says on the chart on page 3 shows risk factor for age and sex. Author indicates people who are 25 to 30 and males more than females are at greater risk. So there are 5 lines here in case you have 5 sources for a risk factor. We're at the beginning of the semester, so you might only have 1. You might not have any. So you use the ones you have. If you have more than 5, feel free to add the sources, because the purpose of a needs assessment outline is to help you write your needs assessment. So it's critical that this be as accurate as possible. You then have your second risk factor. You'll list the risk factor, and then you'll use APA format just like you did on the prior page, and you'll list the source and what that source tells you that you can put in your paper. You will have to have 5 risk factors at this point in the semester. By the time you write your grant, the goal will be that you have 3 strong risk factors. But we start with 5 for a variety of reasons. Sometimes as you're working, things become very clear that it is not a relevant risk factor or you can't find data on it. So when you're doing your needs assessment outline, use your annotated bibliographies, logic models, reading notes. And when you do your needs assessment, make sure you use your outline to write your needs assessment. We're going through a series of steps to teach you the writing process. So we do annotated bibliographies, you have the logic model, you use those items to create your outline, and then you use your outline to write your paper. So that's the series of steps that it takes to do this process correctly. So when you're writing your needs assessment, make sure you use current peer-reviewed literature. Make sure you use your own words. Copy and pasting other people's words, even if you cite it, is incorrect. It is plagiarism still. You need to get almost everything into your own words. APA almost never uses quotations. Try to be as thorough and succinct as possible. Remember the burger analogy, so organize your paper like a burger. Make sure you have enough time to write it. This is the point in your college career where you cannot sit down and write a paper the night before it's due. And take time to use APA and correct English usage. Your required textbook on the writer's reference helps you with APA and English usage. If you chose not to buy it, it's a required textbook for me, then you have to figure out these items by finding other sources. Don't use old literature or popular sources like People Magazine or let's see, another one. The nightly news, the weekly newspaper. Those are not the best sources. If you have one source like that and you have 8 other sources, you're fine, but we don't want to have a whole list of sources that are just popular sources. Do not copy and paste items from the article and cite them. Do not ramble. Say what you need to say in as few words as possible. Do not try to write this at the last minute, and do not ignore APA spelling and grammar. So in groups, we'll talk about this a little bit, or in the whole class. It depends on how things are going. We'll talk about the way that this is going and the kind of things, the information that you need for your paper. These are questions that people have. How many risk factors? People typically have 5. I want you to have 5 at this point. How many sources? Most people have around 5 references at this point. However, if your group is sharing references, you might have more. Sometimes you don't have everything for every risk factor at this point in the semester. So if you have a risk factor, for example, you have lack of trust in the medical community and you haven't found anything yet for that risk factor, list the risk factor, and then write, I don't have a reference for this yet, or I cannot find a reference for this, because that lets me know that you need help when I'm grading your paper. And what if you don't have enough for every reference, for every risk factor? Or what if you have, for example, one risk factor might have 5 references and another risk factor have none or 1? That's okay at this point in the semester because you're just beginning. And this is a process that will grow throughout the semester of our time together. So that concludes the overview of a needs assessment outline. I've recorded it so you can listen to it even after class is over. I hope it's helpful, and make sure you ask questions if you need information.